Now, voting is underway across the United States in this year's midterm elections that will decide whether Republicans or Democrats control both houses of Congress. Now, polling appears to have given the Republicans an edge due to bread and butter issues, including the high cost of living, record high inflation, and also an uptick in crime in an election cycle seen as a referendum on the party in power. But Democrats have argued that democracy itself was on the ballot amid false claims of election fraud from MAGA Republicans who continue to buy into the election fraud myth that saw the US Capitol stormed in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. Here are some of the closing arguments made by surrogates and candidates across the US.
We face one of those inflection points. One of those moments that not only comes around every 3, 4, 5 generations. We all know in our bones that our democracy is at risk. Latest polls say 76% of American people worry about maintaining our democracy. And we know that this is your generation's moment to defend it, to preserve it, to choose it.
I got a report, hey, there's been an elderly fellow wandering around aimlessly on the streets of Miami. I was like, oh, Joe came. So he came down here, and honestly, I'm happy he did because it reminds all the voters of Florida about how destructive his policies have been and the fact that the Democrats in this state vote with him 100% of the time. And if you think about the problems we face as a country, you look at the inflation at a 40-year high, you look at the open border, you look at the energy problems that we have. All of those problems did not just materialize out of thin air. They were all problems that have been created by Biden's very own policies.
I want the women of Georgia to know that as you woke up one summer morning and saw a constitutional right taken out from you, and now you're wondering if you'll ever have control over your own body, I want you to know that I see you. I want the black women to know as they deal with maternal mortality and die 3 to 4 times at the rate of their white sisters that I see you. I want workers all across Georgia and small business owners to know that I see you and I'm ready to serve you for 6 more years.
This is the year we're going to take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, we're going to take back America, and in 2024, most importantly, we are going to take back our magnificent White House, right?
Right, for a little bit more on this developing story, our United States correspondent out of New York is Sherwin Bryce-Pease, and he joins us now. Sherwin, it feels like perhaps we still haven't even gotten over the hangover of the 2020 presidential election, and here we are at it again, and the stakes, as was then, are very high this time around as well. And I just wonder how important these polls are, given that the party in power usually is being judged at this point in time.
Yeah, we do feel, Peter, that we are in a perpetual election cycle in the United States. You're quite right to point out that we don't feel, that we've had too much of Joe Biden in the White House, because it still feels like so much of that 2020 presidential election remains unsettled, particularly as it relates to the attack on Congress and, of course, the January 6th committee that continues investigating, and those false allegations of fraud and, speaking to an illegitimate poll and result in 2020 that still permeates and is perpetuated by former President Donald Trump and his MAGA Republicans. So it does speak to the importance of this election, as you correctly pointed out in that introduction. It is a referendum essentially on the incumbent, the party in power. Democrats control the House of Representatives. by a small majority, the Senate by an even smaller majority, essentially a 50-50 split, where Kamala Harris, the vice president, based on who controls the White House, delivering a deciding vote when that is required. And of course, you have Joe Biden in the White House. So with oil prices high, with which influences gas prices, crime, a spike in big cities across the United States, there is certainly momentum behind Republicans in this midterm. If you look at most recent history, Barack Obama won in 2008, lost heavily in both the Congress and the House of Representatives. 2 years later, the same can be said of Donald Trump. He won in 2016. He had a Republican Congress, and Nancy Pelosi 2 years later took the Speaker's gavel. So history informs what we will expect in this election. And given the temperature in the United States around bread and butter issues, be that high inflation, be that economic concerns, that spells doom and gloom, certainly for the party in power. But there are other issues that are, of course, fueling Democrats in this election, including the Supreme Court ruling earlier this year that struck down the federal right to abortion, and of course the January 6th attack on Congress, which they have framed now as an election that speaks to democracy in itself being on the ballot. So all is not lost, Peter, but certainly it's advantaged Republicans going into this final voting day. You'll recall that some 40 million ballots had already been cast before this final election day in early voting across the country. And so advantaged Republicans moving into this final day. But the question is, how big will that advantage play itself out when the final ballots are counted in the next 24 to 48 hours, Peter?
You talked about some of the issues there, the economy, inflation, and the truth is, we just heard a Republican in that package saying that it's all Joe Biden's fault, but that's not really true, is it? And I guess the Democrats have tried to push back on this, but in the end, if you are in Utah and you're going to the petrol station and prices are going up, you look to the White House and you don't quite care what's happening in the rest of the world.
Yeah, inflation isn't essentially driven by government policy, right? That's the purview of the Reserve Bank, or the central bank as it's known here, in terms of keeping inflation within that target range. I think there's similar conversations in South Africa around that. So, but if you're in the White House, if you are the governor of a state where there's high crime, you got to own it, right? Whether it's your policies or not, even though it might be a hangover from the previous administration, as one sees in terms of the cyclical nature of economies, right? They go up, they go down, and it's difficult to sort of point fingers at which person or party is in power, because the hangover of an economy is cyclical. It goes up and it goes down. So the point, though, being, Peter, is that if you're the president in the White House and things are going really bad under your watch, whether it's your fault or not, people are going to point the finger at you. I was out at a polling station in Midtown Manhattan earlier today. We spoke to some voters after they cast their votes earlier today. And remember, here's some context for you, Peter. New York is traditionally blue territory, strong Democratic base here. But there are shifting sands based on the high crime rate we are seeing and the economic toll and the high cost of living we are seeing in places like this. This is what some of the voters had to say. Let's watch. What are the issues that are important to you in this election?
I think I just wanted to vote for, take my kids, and vote Democrat. So that's it.
Crime and the cost of living is going crazy, the economy, and crime mainly, safety.
Did that make you lean in a specific direction?
Yeah, definitely to the right.
I think we need a balance, and I think that the Republicans are a lot tougher on crime, and I think they'll bring the economy back a little bit more. I think the Democrats definitely have some good ideas too, and I think we need a balance, right? We need people compromising, and I think that's what we haven't done in the last few years, is compromise with each other. I want to see your point of view, and I want you to be open to my point of view. That used to happen a lot. It doesn't happen anymore.
Any particular issue that drove you to the polls this time around, leaning in a particular way?
Crime in the city, I think that's been sort of a big issue for a lot of New Yorkers. So.
And what does that mean in terms of who you voted for?
Someone who's tough on crime, so I'd like to make sure. Well, I didn't vote for, I voted Liberal, actually, Democratic.
The economy and the cost of living, things of that nature. There's a lot on the you know,
Does
there's
the
a lot going
economy
on.
and cost of living make you lean a certain way?
No, because I don't think either party honestly has the answer. You know, the cost of living in terms of gas, housing, food. The government doesn't produce gas, housing, or food. The corporations do. And I'm not sure either party is going to deal with the corporations. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All
So
right.
who'd you vote for?
I often vote with the Democrats.
Can you help us with your opinion, really?
That's my pattern.
Difficult, Peter, to extract those answers from voters. They're not often keen to share who they voted for, given the division that one sees in terms of partisan politics in the United States. But here's an interesting anecdote. New York being blue country, Kathy Hochul, who replaced Andrew Cuomo as the governor of New York, she's on the ballot, Peter. And it's a toss-up in New York in terms of who's going to win the governor's race when all the ballots are tabulated tonight. Republicans really seeing an opening here in terms of the state of the economy in the United States and also crime levels that have spiked in New York City, giving Democrats certainly a run for their money in what is traditionally blue country. Peter.
All right, so voting is just one part of the equation. The other, of course, is counting the ballots. And if we go back to 2020, and since then, counting has been the big issue, particularly when you consider the MAGAs and Donald Trump himself. And I just wonder, is this going to be another issue in this election process?
So you have these in-person ballots where you use your feet and go and vote on election day, and then you have a process around the country in almost all the states of the United States where they have early voting. You can do it in person in some states, but you can also do it via mail-in ballot or absentee ballot. What happens with those absentee ballots, and this again depends on the state you're in, Peter, they get set aside until the closing of the polls on election day. So November 8th, when the polls close, is the only time you can then start processing the ballots that maybe have been sitting in a holding storage room for 2 weeks or 10 days or for however long they've been sitting there since those ballots were submitted via the post. They then get tabulated after all the in-person votes have been counted. So what tends to happen is, based on the narrative you hear from MAGA Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, is they like to vote in person. They don't trust the mail-in ballot system, which became a big talking point during the lockdowns. Remember, COVID-19 was happening during the last presidential election. And so Republicans have fueled this narrative that those mail-in ballots that are usually counted last and then often tilt what looks like a Republican win in the early hours of the counting process only for the state or the district to go a Democratic way or Joe Biden's way, as we saw in 2020. That's what is fueling this debate around the integrity of elections in the United States. But there is no fraud, Peter. Over 60 court cases in 2020 were thrown out because they just have no evidence of a substantial nature that speaks to this election being stolen by Democrats. But what you've heard from a number of these MAGA Republicans that are running is that they will accept the outcome of the election if they win. So in all these toss-up, these close races in various congressional districts and in states around the country, if it's too close to call by the end of the night, I think you're going to start hearing a lot of talk about, was this free and fair? This election was stolen. I was leading at 10 p.m. last night, but at 3 p.m. there was a dump of mail-in ballots, and that turned the result upside down. So those are the concerns a lot of people are having in the country based on the narrative that is still to this day being perpetuated by the former president. He has appeared as a surrogate for many, many candidates, Republican candidates around the country, and he talks about how he won the election against Joe Biden, which, of course, is not borne out by the facts, Peter.
So we're going to wrap up, and last question is, Congress, polls seem to suggest that it's going to go the Republican way. What about the Senate? I believe there are 35 seats up for grabs there. At the moment, Kamala Harris has the magic wand, doesn't she?
Yes, she does, and maybe the magic wings as well, Peter. A can of Red Bull will get her there. Let me step out of the way. I want to show you this map we've created for you. This gives you a sense of the Senate races. So dark blue means, a secure Democratic state in terms of the Senate. Light blue, maybe less so, but still leaning Democrat. Pink means leaning Republican. Very dark red means, a sure a sure Republican seat. But let's focus, Peter, on the gray areas. If you look at Washington State, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, let me go through each individually. In Washington State, it's a toss-up. There is a Democratic senator that's an incumbent. In Nevada, you have a Democratic senator that's an incumbent, also a toss-up state. In Arizona, a Democratic senator that's also an incumbent, toss-up. Colorado, Democrat, toss-up. Wisconsin, you have a Republican incumbent, toss-up. Georgia, you have a Democratic incumbent senator, also a toss-up. Pennsylvania is an open seat. A Republican senator resigned, also a toss-up. New Hampshire, Democratic incumbent, toss-up. So there are more Democratic senators that find themselves in toss-up races, which means Republicans see an open window, an opportunity for them to gain seats from the Democrats. Look, we're not saying that all of those toss-ups are going to go the Republican way, but it does make it a very interesting time for Democrats in terms of their ability to hold on to their majority in the Senate, given just how close these numbers are looking right now. And given how many Democratic incumbents find themselves in these toss-up races, we have to call it, it's advantage Republicans in that sense, Peter. And so they look more and more likely that they have a hand on possibly regaining even the Senate majority in addition to the House majority. But those will only be confirmed when all is said and done and all the numbers are in.
All right, Sherwin, we'll leave it there for the time being. A long night ahead of you. I'm sure when we wake up with Morning Live, you'll have some stories to tell us about how the results are starting to trickle in. Thanks so much for this update for tonight, though.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, that's our New York correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, on the day that Americans choose who's going to be in Congress and changing seats, perhaps in Senate as well.